Going green is no longer a choice but a necessity for economies around the world, as the severity of climate change and global warming are becoming more and more apparent by the day. The key word here is sustainability, and that means cutting out the carbon down to net zero in all possible areas of the business. And without immediate action, not only will the planet suffer, but so will economic growth. Now, Deloitte says 75% of the Asia-Pacific region's GDP is exposed to climate disruption, with half of the world's labour force impacted. Now, South Korea could lose up to 232 trillion won, or nearly $200 billion by 2050 if it doesn't go green, which is why the country has launched a Green New Deal to jumpstart a sustainable economic growth path. We talk about the prospects today with Pradeep Philip, partner and head of economics, property, infrastructure and energy at Deloitte Access Economics. Very warm welcome to you. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you today?
Lovely to be with you and your audience here. Thank you for this chance.
Well, you recently came out with a report about a turning point for Asia-Pacific economies, and your report says that climate change is going to reverse the Asia-Pacific region's hard-won economic gains if no action is taken. How quickly has the region advanced so far, and well, why is their growth model no longer sustainable?
You know, our story of this region is a really rich one, and it's about longevity that has been punctuated by periods of upheaval. Now, over the last 70 years or so, no region has advanced globally like ours, and along the way, millions upon millions of people have been lifted out of poverty. We've seen rapid urbanization and industrialization, and we've seen this region become the powerhouse for global economic growth. But you know, labor arbitrage was the reason why global supply chains moved here, but what also moved to our region was high emissions intensive production systems. And while that was really good in terms of growth, what has happened is that it's also made us highly vulnerable to the effects of climate change. And what we're now seeing is that we've reached a turning point, that if we are to achieve global objectives, then we have to do our bit. Our report shows us that the fight on climate change will be won or lost in this region, here in the Asia Pacific. And we have the building blocks of enormous change that we can drive in our region and globally. We just now need to be coordinated about it, and we need to go hard. Because you recall that over the last couple of weeks, we had the UN IPCC report, and what did that tell us? It told us that time is running out, that the window for change is narrowing, that we run the risk of runaway climate change. Now, our region in Asia Pacific will bear the brunt of runaway climate change. We have the most to lose and the most to gain. And that's the essence of our report.
Right, and economists like yourself always talk about opportunity cost, and well, what would be the cost of doing nothing or not responding quickly enough to climate change for the Asia-Pacific region?
You know, one of the reasons this debate has been so fraught is because the economics has not been right. Because most economic debate proceeds from the assumption that the economy will just continue to grow at trend, completely unaffected by climate change. And so when you then think about action on climate change, everything looks like a cost. But we know from the science that doing nothing on climate change will cause physical damages, which will translate into economic damages, and that will bring the economy down. So our report creates a new baseline, a baseline where if you don't act on climate change, you will see a diminution of growth. And over the next 50 years, that translates into a loss of around $96 trillion for the Asia-Pacific region alone. Now, the flip side of that is a positive story for our region, for our people, and for global economic growth.
And on the other hand, what is the growth potential for the region if they make the right move at this critical point?
So not only do we avoid damages, but we also create the new engine for economic growth. And our analysis suggests that instead of a loss of some $96 trillion over the next 50 years, the Asia-Pacific region stands to gain around $47 trillion over that period, avoiding damages and building the new engine for economic growth.
And what opportunities do you see for South Korea in particular?
Look, South Korea is a vibrant economy and can drive enormous amount of technological change, create new production systems and operating systems, and lead the world. It can actually export some of the IP, some of the technologies, particularly around things like hydrogen and new systems of transport, which can revolutionize the world. So there is enormous upside. In fact, in our modeling, we highlight that South Korea, if we do nothing about climate change, will suffer a loss over the next 50 years of nearly $1 trillion. But it stands to gain on the upside of around $2 trillion gain over the next 50 years if we get this right.
Oh, that's a lot of gain as well. South Korea now it has a 3-pillar plan called the Korean New Deal to create a digital, green and what we call human-centered economy. Do you think this still is a good starting point? I mean, it's right now mostly a top-down government initiative. Should there be more incentives for the private sector to take charge?
Look, in the end, change will only take place if the private sector gets involved and transforms its production systems and operating models. If we as individuals change our behavior in our communities, in what we do every day, and if governments also provide us with the right direction and the right incentives. You know, we see so much change potential for the good by harnessing digital technologies to solve some of the biggest problems that we have. Always remembering that growth is here for a purpose, and that is to enhance the well-being of our citizens. And so having this 3-pillar approach offers a great start for how we as an economy and a society create the new future.
And then the trouble is some businesses might not be convinced. I mean, is it really profitable for businesses to make this transition to carbon-free business? I mean, how will carbon-intensive industries in particular make this transition?
You know, change is never easy. It is hard. But we're at that point where there is no choice but change, because the cost of not changing is far greater. And for business, we're already seeing in international markets, investors, financiers, and indeed customers starting to change. And this is going to be really important for company boards, for company management to start to understand where the market is going. Another great motivation for change is actually the employees who work for companies. We are starting to see in survey after survey that employees who are citizens, consumers, and also workers wanting to see change towards lower emissions intensive goods and services. Because after all, this is about their future.
There does seem to be a societal consensus for a green transition, and many are hoping that this will create, sparks of innovation. But how would you encourage innovation in a country like South Korea, which is facing a productivity crisis due to its shrinking population?
You know, the productivity crisis is not unique to South Korea. We're seeing this everywhere. And part of the reason why is because the things that drove economic growth and productivity over the last 50 years have started to peter out. And so we are now starting to see companies and economies look for new sources of value. And there's nothing greater than a transformation of the production system of the economy. We will see innovation, we will see investment in new capital, in new operating systems, in new workforce capability. And these will be the driving forces for growth and productivity into the future. Why? Because we need to solve the big issues of our time. The big issues of our time around technological disruption, around climate change, and importantly, about bringing our people into the new economy, into the jobs of the future in a way that they feel ownership for the economy that they're going to create. So I think there is enormous upside for productivity and growth if we get the settings right.
But what about some countries that can't afford the transition at the moment? How should Asian Pacific countries that lack infrastructure or the technology to make this carbon neutral transition really go about this process of doing so? I mean, how would economies that are also considered risky or emerging markets gain enough foreign investment to back this?
You know, we have treated climate change as just everybody's own business. But what we're realizing is that while no one business, no one economy, no one country can solve it for this, we need everybody. And I think this goes to the heart of the question that you've asked. There is an opportunity for us to think about how we export decarbonisation from those that know best, those that have investment, those that have know-how. How do we export this to all countries in our region? And we know there is an enormous amount of innovation going on in our region. In South Korea, in Japan, in India, in China, we're leading the world in terms of battery technology, thinking about hydrogen, thinking about solar farms. These things can be harnessed in our region in a cooperative model so that those who don't can benefit, and as a group of countries in our region, as citizens of the world, we can drive economic growth and build a more equitable society for our people.
And right now, countries in the Asia Pacific, they are faced with the threat of, this uncertainty between the United States and China as they continue their diplomatic and also economic rift. What kind of risks do you see for the foreseeable future for these economies, and how should they really guard themselves against this uncertainty?
You know, geopolitics is often viewed in very negative terms. Here is an issue, climate change, that can bring us together. And we need a more hopeful story for the major economies in the world to get together to solve something that doesn't care about geopolitical boundaries. Climate change doesn't care about the color of government, doesn't care about geopolitical boundaries. We all need to be in this together. And I think we've got the COP26 meeting coming up in November in Glasgow. We've got other international forums. This is a chance for the world to get together, which is why our report's really important. Our report is not about a doomsday scenario. It is actually about the hope that we have to build a better future for the world in which we live, but more importantly, our colleagues, our friends, our families, the people around us. This is the ultimate objective, and I think coalescing around a challenge like climate change can bring the biggest and the smallest of us in the world together around something that we care about.
Right, so it's time for it's a turning point, as you said, and it's essential that countries make the right turn at this point. And this is where we'll have to wrap up the interview. That was Dr. Pradeep Philip, Partner and Head of Economics, Property, Infrastructure and Energy at Deloitte Access Economics. Thank you again so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
And to our viewers, thank you very much for watching.